Why is it so important that the universe is made of 99.9% plasma? Does that affect us?
It certainly does. First of all, because we ourselves are plasma, and our physical bodies are made of atoms, but our true selves are all made of plasma, and everything that really matters is made of plasma. And if we don't think in terms of plasma, we've got the wrong perspective.
Thank you. Now, you would use the word plasma. There's other words that people will know for that. Do you think? Like, I noticed when you, what actually came up for me, so I'm just going to associate this with you, in The Secret Doctrine, she says, and this always puts goosebumps down my spine, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible. Since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by a human experience, we have to experience that. And you speak of plasma almost as spiritual, don't you?
Yes, I was speaking, I attempted to speak in the scientific terminology. What I call plasma is what traditionally has been referred to as spiritual. Absolutely, the same thing.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I sort of made that link quite quickly. I was thinking this is like pure theosophy, and particularly when you said we don't die, we are eternal. We need to learn to become good. You know, I might as well. I just thought that's exactly what you're speaking of there with the ancient wisdom, isn't it? That's
Absolutely.
where various traditions, yeah, all going there. So thank you. Now, my next question, why has nobody until now realized that the gigantic Kordylewski clouds, which dwarf the size of the Earth, need urgent attention and study? So why hasn't anyone realized this? I mean, I know you said the various scientists are like a dog with a bone and so forth, but you know, that's you must have felt like this was such a turning point for science and for humanity.
Yes, well, I should explain, because I didn't, that the clouds emit no light. And they are very tenuous because they're on such a huge scale that the particles and things composing them are so far apart that from our scale perspective, you can see through them, so that they're almost invisible, and it takes incredible skill to detect them. And that's why it wasn't until 1961 that Kordylewski was able to do so. Then people made half-hearted attempts to verify his findings, and they said, well, we don't see these clouds. And they said, oh, it's just nonsense. And so it was only in 2019 that the Hungarians came along and they said, oh, Kordylewski was correct, and they were able to prove it using more advanced instruments, because you can't see them normally.
Yeah. Do you think that, like, when you realized that you had to do that work, I mean, it's almost like your life work starting back then, 2019. Is that
Yes.
how you felt, that something had come about to make that leap?
Yes, I felt that if I don't do it, nobody's ever going to do it.
Yeah. Okay. There's one other question. You kind of answered it in saying the sun was conscious, but I almost felt like this was proof. The question is, I've been studying the sun for a decade now and observed that it has a tendency to go quiet when it faces Earth in terms of CMEs, which is coronal mass ejections. At the same time, our ionosphere has been getting thinner around the Earth, which puts us in danger of those CMEs. Considering that you were saying plasma may have a consciousness, such as the Kordylewski clouds containing plasma, do you think it is possible that the sun, i.e. plasma, is quite conscious of our vulnerability, which may be the reason we are getting these Earth faced quiet incidents? You know, when it comes to the Earth, then it's quiet from there. In other words, could the sun be a conscious being? And that comes from Carol Van Weed from Auckland. Robert.
Well, this is an amazingly important point. And Carol is obviously very, very bright indeed, because she's seen straight through to one of the central issues, which I hadn't actually gone into in what I've said so far. Yes is the answer. Yes is the answer to all of that. But there's more involved. The coronal mass ejections are these blobs of plasma that are ejected from the corona around the sun, which go out into the solar system, and some of them are directed at the Earth. And I believe that direction is intentional, and that these huge mass ejections, which are really plasma ejections, they're known as plasmoids, because a sort of blob of plasma is called a plasmoid. And I believe that they themselves have brains and are intelligent, and that they have code and messages inside and information, and that they are transmissions. And that when the sun wants to maybe do something to help us in some way, like improve the tenuous and very debilitated state of our damaged ionosphere, that it sends these things to activate certain processes to help us out. Also, it sends inspiration to those who are receptive to it mentally. And in terms of taking it easy at certain periods when our ionosphere is very weak, I believe it does hold back because it knows the situation.
Thank you, Robert. I would like to go to the chat. So I'm going to read out from the chat now, because there's lots of little comments. Murray Stentivert, now he's speaking later on in our series. Murray says Leadbeater, Besant and Hodgson perceive tiny fine particles to the substance of the etheric and astral and higher planes, which are the realm of the heaven worlds and the locus or states of consciousness. Do you see this as a delightful extension of the scope of the concepts of plasma and heaven?
Yes, absolutely. And the tiny particles are fundamental, because you can't have intelligent plasma clouds without tiny particles, which are also dust particles. I didn't go into the dust side. And so what they were doing is they were perceiving this psychically or telepathically, because the scientific evidence hadn't come through yet. But though the three of them were all very turned on, all the people that he mentions, Annie Besant and Leadbeater, and of course there was Alice Bailey.
Jeffrey Hudson, yeah.
They were all, focusing on all these higher things, and they were getting a lot of truths through by sensing them. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Is there a correlation between plasma and new findings on dark matter?
Yes, absolutely. I don't believe that dark matter, as conventionally spoken of, exists. The plasma exists in three modes. The electric universe people have already explained all that, but I'll just briefly say that it can be in the dark mode, which is completely invisible. It can be in the glow mode, which you can sort of see, and it can be in what Don Scott, wonderful man, Don Scott, the chief electric universe chap, calls the arc mode, as in an arc light, which is very bright. The arc mode is blazing, so that lightning is in the arc mode. And so dark matter is merely the huge amount of dark mode plasma that fills the universe. Why they can't see that, the conventional physicists, I don't know what's wrong with them.
Arnie, a new perspective to cosmogenesis. Wait there. Can you touch upon Chandra Wickramasinghe take on plasma physics? His reasoning on the COVID pandemic resonates Rudolf Steiner's writings. Any comment there?
Well, I can't comment on Steiner's writings because I don't know what he said about that. But Chandra has written many technical papers. Well, I first met him because of the theory that he and Fred Hoyle evolved, that comets which go through the solar system in their interiors carry bacteria and viruses. And that the viruses mutate as they travel along in the comets. And when the comet gets near the sun, it vaporizes a bit and it gets a tail. And then some of the viruses from that comet stream off and they eventually filter down through the Earth's atmosphere. And this is, they thought that a lot of new diseases, obviously not all, but some mutations of viruses come from space in the form of coming out of the comet tails. Now, recent research, very recent research, has confirmed that comets do have all the amino acids in them and all this kind of thing, and that they do have what's called microbiota, which is a general term for every kind of living microscopic thing. So it could be a virus or a bacterium, or it could be a fungus or whatever you like, or a spore or a seed. And the general theory is generally known by the old-fashioned name of panspermia, but it's still a good name. And I published a paper on the prehistory of panspermia, in other words, the ancient versions of it, and from many ancient cultures. And so I got involved with the conferences with all of this. And Chandra is one of the key authors, along with a very, very brilliant scientist in Australia called Edward Steele, called Ted Steele, of alternative views of the origins of the COVID virus, which we think could be a mutation that actually happened inside a comet and it dropped down through the atmosphere. What I think everybody has now come to accept, which I think we were the first people to propound, was that the COVID virus was circulating in the winds, the wind systems of the Earth. I think that that's been accepted by now, because otherwise, how did people on ships at sea, merchant ships at sea for 6 weeks, out of touch with humans for 6 weeks, suddenly get a COVID epidemic on board this ship? But if it was coming from the winds, that explains it. I think that the wind circulation, which we proposed of the virus, is now no longer heretical. And it was Chandra who was one of the main proponents of this, along with Ted Steele. But see, and I have been a joint author of about 20 of these papers with Chandra and Ted, emphasizing the importance of the winds and some of the work, because most of the authors of those papers are heretical virologists. A lot of these papers have been published in virology journals. And so then it comes to be assumed that we are somehow enemies of whatever it is that's going on politically. But we're not interested in that. We're interested in trying to help explain what's happening. But the information which I have in my book, which is completely separate from that, is to do with dust particles and viruses in clouds here on Earth. So for instance, I have a lot of information about our body clouds. Now, everybody who's a theosophist knows that there are people of mystical attributes who claim to have seen auras around the human body, and especially the head. Well, I explain how they are physically possible because of the recent discoveries that we all have microbial clouds surrounding us, which just happen to match what the psychics have been saying all these centuries are the auras. And they're the same thing again. So see, everything's connecting. What I'm trying to do is give the scientific underpinnings for all these so-called mystical ideas, which aren't mystical at all. They're just science that was misunderstood, that was ahead of its time, which we can now substantiate.
Exactly. Oh, you make such sense. You make such clear sense, and all that, everything is connected. Okay, now I've got lots of questions lined up here, so let's whip through these. Peter, I think we've answered this. Peter, is there a relationship between plasma and dark matter? And we spoke about the new findings on dark matter, so we won't go back there. Murray, the conscious sun is the foundation of the ancient Gayatri mantra, a magnificent perception of the sun on 7 layers of reality. Any comment on that? I mean, that's quite interesting, actually.
Well, there are, of course, I'm not entirely understanding his point, but there are 7 layers of the sun, but the sun is layered. Physically speaking, the sun is layered because there's the interior, which we don't know a great deal about. Then there's what we call the surface of the sun. Then there are different outer levels culminating in the corona, but not really culminating in the corona because we are still in the far extension of the corona. As I said, the entire solar system. But, and when you get something that's unified like that, you get long range order. In my 1998 reedition of my book, The Sirius Mystery, which contained 50% more material, I said that I believed that our sun and Sirius, the Sirius system, were in the same cell. I named it the Anubis cell because Sirius is the dog star, you know, Anubis was a dog god. And so I believe that there is a cell in the galaxy, which includes both our sun and the Sirius system, and which therefore has dimensions of at least 8.7 light years, and that within this cell, we get long-range order occurring. Now, in my book, The New Science of Heaven, I explained that even though there's this restriction of the speed of light, that's only for things that have mass. Information has no mass. And I therefore believe it's possible for information to be communicated instantaneously without distance and speed being involved, because it has no mass, therefore it's not restricted by the speed of light restriction.
Thank you, Robert. I had heard they created a hole in the atmosphere. Also believe it is a symptom of pole shifts. So there are probably a lot of contributions. Loved your talk, and we'll seek out your book too. Any comments on that, about this big hole?
Well, I think that they've made more than one hole in the atmosphere. And of course, when it started getting really bad with the ozone layer, they took steps to remediate that by controlling refrigerators and all that. That seems to have been, to a large extent, successful. But because they didn't have to keep blowing those kind of holes for military purposes, but they're still damaging the ionosphere.
Susanna Roskilly from Canterbury, where Susie was based down there. What a marvelous, mind-blowing, entertaining presentation. Thank you, thank you. Is space dust from the clouds?
Space dust is really, really important. Never look down on dust. I talk about that a lot in the book. I even talk about the history of dust. And the thing is that dust becomes charged. So for instance, you can have as many as 10,000 electrons attached to a single dust particle. And the reason why the fusion reactors weren't working was they kept getting dust in them. And people working on those things thought that was contamination, or what they call in America, dirt. And so they started wearing all these white hats and suits and don't breathe and whatever you do, don't have dandruff and go, when you go into the room with the reactor. And it was all pointless because they discovered it was not contamination. Because this really clever guy called Gary Selwyn, with whom I've been in touch, in 1989, when he was working for IBM, I think it was, that you know that the people who make microchips and now nanochips, they deposit the circuits using plasma. And so they had to realize what's going on, because you get a dust in your plasma, you get your circuit mixed up that you're depositing on your chip. And he discovered and proved what revolutionized plasma physics forever. And when I was in touch with him, he didn't even know that plasma manufactures its own dust because it has to have that dust. And so dust is actually the most important thing. So in the funeral service of the Church of England, it says, "Remember, O man, that dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." Whoever wrote those words for a religious prayer didn't know how true they really were, because we all really are bioplasma beings of charged dust.
Interesting. Dust to dust. Anyway, now Richard says, thanks, Robert. Fascinating topics, and I love your sense of humour. Wendy from Auckland, do you think it's possible to repair the ionosphere?
That's very difficult, Wendy. Very difficult. A lot of the damage is probably permanent. And that's why they want to shift the blame onto carbon dioxide and make money out of it at the same time, because they've created carbon credits, you see, which makes all the big companies super rich, because they get extra billions for suppressing carbon when it's not necessarily carbon dioxide that's doing all of this. I don't say that carbon dioxide doesn't create a greenhouse effect. I'm just saying that they've shoved all the underlying earlier causes aside, and they keep beating the drums for carbon dioxide to shut everybody up so that nobody ever talks about the other damage that I described, the atom bombs and the atmospheric heating that's still going on. And over the horizon radar, which you have to know if the other guys are launching their missiles, which you can't see because of the horizon, you have to have over the horizon radar, and it does have to bounce off the ionosphere. That's how you see over the horizon. I mean, they can't not have it, but at the same time, they're still damaging the ionosphere. So what can you do about that? Is there any way to replenish the ionosphere? That is a very difficult question, Wendy. I wish I knew. I wish the answer was yes. Maybe. I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know everything. I know you'd like me to.
Watch this space with that one, maybe. So, yeah. We've got Joseph Gann from, I think Joseph is from Singapore. The plasma sounds like the non-vivified primal matter, subparticle medium from the Vedic context. Is that accurate?
Well, it's an excellent analogy. Yes, of course. I'm not saying that. I did study Sanskrit and Hindu texts, and I have the greatest respect for the particular school of thought that I was interested in was the Samkhya, which then merged with the yoga school. But the Vedas, of course, are fascinating. To the Hindus, they are the ultimate sacred scripture because they are the earliest. They are the hymns, they're sacred hymns brought by the Aryans when they came into India. And they contain a lot of wisdom. So now how is it that such ancient peoples who didn't have modern science could know so much that we now are seeing was true? And my take on that is that there was basically people were entering into shamanic states in antiquity all the time, the priests and the wise men and so on, and they were able to intuit all this, which we now can go about investigating in laboratories, which they didn't have. But how can so much ancient wisdom be true? It's got to be because they were picking it up psychically, because it exists. And because we are plasma and the universe is plasma, if we get into the right harmonic relationship with it, we can start picking up traditional wisdom without having labs. And that must have been the case with the people who brought the Vedas with them into India, with the Egyptians, with everyone.
Thank you. You said the right harmonic relationship, that makes perfect sense, because what we're wanting to do is change that vibration, isn't it? From what is your everyday materialistic life, you're wanting to move that vibration into a more ethical, a higher, finer field in a way, isn't it? What you're speaking about.
Absolutely. In fact, I believe that vibration is absolutely fundamental, and that as we become better people, our vibration level raises higher. And that when we die, in quotes, and revert to the plasma world, that we tend to go to the level that matches our personal vibration. And so as you make yourself a better and better person, when you go back to the plasma world, you go to the level that's at that vibration level. So people at low vibration levels they revert to a very low vibration level of the plasma world, or what you could call the other world for us, which, is not all that thrilling and can be very boring. And if you're a very bad person, very, very unpleasant. And we don't need to go into all the structure of the afterlife in this talk. But the thing is that it's all determined, in my opinion, by vibration. And we each have the equivalent of a barcode, which is our vibration level. And a lot of what happens after we leave the earth is automatic, that our vibration level that's in our barcode just takes us to that level, but without any intermediary being required.
Ganesh Kumar from Auckland. Robert, have you also investigated anything about cold fusion and the plasma universe?
Well, I don't know enough about cold fusion. So anything I said on that would be pretty much worthless because I haven't studied it sufficiently.
I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name well. Sivasubramanian, I think it is. So I hope I got that right. Let's say, yeah, I'm wondering as we are talking about space travels and creating further damage to the ionosphere, if you can answer that just in a quick sentence, Robert, would be great.
Well, you know, it is a bit tricky. There are all kinds of questions about how much damage we're causing by sending up too many rockets. And what does it really mean to have all those thousands of satellites? And this is a very vexed question, and in fact, it is a cause for concern. But I can't give you an actual answer on that because I simply don't know how much damage it's causing.
So, Robert, it has been an absolute joy for us, for all of us that have attended this evening, to hear your presentation, your sense of humor, and what you bring to the talk. You make it so interesting, and it really lines up with that ancient wisdom.